Well, good morning, Midway Church. And thank you guys for joining us online, wherever you are. And those of you who are on the beach, put on some sunscreen, or else you will cook like I do when I am down there. But glad you're taking the time to join us every week right here online. And for those of you who are in the room, always great to see you face to face, be able to interact a little bit. I'm getting tired of walls. I love faces, and we can't even see each other's smiles these days. But I'm glad you're here, and thank you for being here. And why don't we right now just I don't know. Why don't we've done this in time past, but let's just have smile practice for anybody who wants to. All right, so. All right, there you are. Glad you're here. Well, open your Bibles with me to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. Hebrews, chapter 11. Today we continue our study series simply called Echoes, Faith That Speaks. Echoes, Faith That Speaks. And we are in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 21, looking through the list that is oftentimes referred to as the heroes of our faith. Whitney and Fernando, where are you? There's Whitney. Fernando's not here. Glad you're here, all the way from California. Used to serve on our staff. Welcome back to West Georgia. Glad you are here and so good to see you. Hebrews chapter 11. If you're ready for the word, say I am. Hebrews 11 and verse 21. Says, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and he worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff. And I'm going to read that one again. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, not if he was dying. Just a reminder. When he was dying, he blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and he worshiped. So he's dying, and he worshiped. Another thought to just ponder for a second. As he's dying, he worshiped. And he blessed each of the sons of Joseph. And as he did so, he's leaning on the top of his staff. Father, thank you for the reading of your word. As we look at the life of Jacob, we look back in hindsight and see what you did through his life. What was to follow, how his faith continues even until this day to echo throughout history. Pray that our faith would be of such that would also echo long after we're gone. In Jesus' name, and all God's people said, amen. There's a key statement regarding this text, this one sentence, this one verse that I want to use. It's on the screen. It simply states, faith allows us to leave a legacy that testifies to God's faithfulness. That's what faith does. Faith allows us to leave a legacy that testifies to God's faithfulness. Jacob was the son of Isaac, the grandson of Abraham. Often when you read about the history of Israel, or you listen to the words of Jesus speaking about Israel, or you read in the New Testament about the history of Israel, oftentimes they will use the phrase or statement, they'll refer to our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Over and over again, you see those three names used together in capsule form to speak about the history from which all of them had come from. We came from our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now we come to Jacob specifically, and Jacob, in the early years of his life, did not start very well. I oftentimes say that you never have to train a child how to lie, cheat, and steal. There is no school to send kids to lie, cheat, and steal. We look at our 4 or 5 or 6-year-old oftentimes, and we say, where did you learn that? And they lie to us while they're explaining it. Matter of fact, they don't know where they learned it. They were born with it. It's called a sinful nature. We are not righteous, no, not one. We've all sinned and fallen short of God's glory. All of us are fallen. We come from a fallen nature. We're born with that fallen nature. I oftentimes say that cats meow and dogs bark and sinners sin. It's as natural as breathing every day. And that's why it plagues us. And for Jacob, it plagued him. As a young man, he developed sort of the name, the title, because of his behavior as deceiver. He was a natural deceiver, a natural prankster, a natural trickster, pulling something on someone in a way to deceive them. And he deceived his brother, he deceived his father, and it began to follow him throughout his life. But now we find him later on in life. He's now 147 years of age. And the scripture teaches us that it's getting close to the time for him to die. And while he has really messed up big time in his life, he wants to make sure he dies well. Y'all all right? He wants to make sure he dies well. You don't have to say anything. Don't give any response. But just a personal question for you to ponder. Have you lived well? Do you have some things in your life that you wish weren't there? Do you have some failures in your life that you wish did not exist? Have you made some decisions in your journey that have created difficult consequences for your life and the life of those around you that you really wish you could take an eraser and sort of mark out? Have you ever pondered and questioned, when I die, is that what they're going to remember about me? I'm the person who did that. Have you come to a point where, to some degree, you internally own your failure in the sense that it now owns you and it has defined who you are, and you wished it didn't, but you're afraid in your soul that when people reflect upon you and when your kids reflect upon your life or your grandkids reflect upon your life, you're afraid they're going to remember the bad things of your life and talk about what a shyster or deceiver or failure or moral failure that you may have been, even though you may have tried to fix some of those things. Or do you have some things like that in your journey? Just something to ponder. It's powerful, isn't it? At 147 years of age, Jacob has come to a point in his life where it's time for him to die. And he decides he wants to address some things and make sure that while he has not lived very well, he wants to make sure he dies well. And he wants to leave a different and a better legacy. It's a key phrase I'm going to use here 2 or 3 times. A different and a better legacy. That's really the theme for this entire message, is how can I leave a different and better legacy than some of the biggest failures of my life? How can I change in such a manner that my faith speaks so loudly towards the end of my life that it begins to wipe out and overshadow some of the failures at different seasons of my life? There's a lesson in this concept. It's that lesson that you may have major failures in your past, but they don't have to define you. By faith, you can leave a different and a better legacy. Today, when writing about Jacob's life in Hebrews chapter 11, does not write about his deceptions. It speaks and writes loudly and clearly about how at the end of his life he blessed 2 of his grandsons in a significant manner, and it speaks about the future. You see, Jacob himself was not a model father. He was not. As a matter of fact, he showed such favoritism toward one of his sons, Joseph, that it caused great difficulty in the heart and soul and mind of all the rest of his kids. Caused great resentment and caused great jealousy. There's another lesson there that you can pretty much imagine. Favoritism is a very destructive thing if you allow yourself. Yes, some kids are easier to love, let's face it. Some kids are. They're loving, they're sweet, they're kind, they cuddle. The others are snappy and aggravated and angry, and some seem to be compliant, and others it takes a stronger hand. It's a part of our natures in life, but all have to be equally loved and feel our love as parents. And Jacob struggled with this, and he was very open about his favoritism because it was against Joe. He was sort of showing favoritism towards Joseph, one of his younger sons. Joseph's brothers developed a scheme, a plan to capture Joseph and sell him into slavery, which they did. And he was gone for the rest of his father's life. For a major segment of time, 30, 40 years gone out of their life. And then towards the end of Jacob's life, through the movement of God and through a famine, God brought them back together and restored them. And Joseph is to me the model. We'll talk about this next Sunday, but is the absolute model on how to deal with life when the worst of life happens to you, but the best of life comes from you. That's next Sunday. When the worst of life happens to you, but the best of life keeps flowing from you. That's Joseph. Captured, thrown into a pit, betrayed by his own family, sold into slavery. Living a life, a model life, an honest life before those who owned him, his master. And yet a scheme was brought against him from the master's wife. He's put into prison. God gives him the ability to interpret dreams. He interprets the dreams of some of the people in prison. They forget about him over and over again. And then finally, towards the end of his life, he finds himself number 2 in all of Egypt, and he's the hero of the entire region. He saves the whole world from starvation. And God puts his family back together again, and Joseph forgives all of them and loves them deeply, even his brothers who sold him. Now, with all of that as a background, I want to say that Jacob, at this particular moment, I've already mentioned, is 147 years old. And he knows he did not get it all right in life. But now he wants to get it all right in death and leave a different and better legacy. And I want to say that you can too. You and I both know we haven't done it all right in life. But how can we make sure we get it all right in death? So I want to give you 4 things. It's about as practical as you're going to get in any sermon for a long time. Number 1, be aware of your age. Anybody aware of that? Be aware of your age. I know you're trying to forget, but don't. Let's look over into the Old Testament, the actual story where it's unfolding. We have only one verse in Hebrews, but look in Genesis chapter 47. In Genesis chapter 47 and in verse 28, Genesis 47, verse 28, here's what it says. Now Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. That is after God reunited them together there in Egypt. And his lifespan was 147 years. And when the time drew near for him to die, he called his son Joseph, and he began speaking to him about matters of life and death. And we'll read the details of that conversation in a moment. He's 147 years old. Now, you and I, here's the thing you need to understand about age. None of us know when we're going to die. You can be young and be dead next week. My brother, I was playing golf with my brother 1 week in Atlanta at a golf tournament with Sid Bream. Opportunity of our life. Had an amazing day. My brother was 33 years old. 2 weeks later, I was doing my brother's funeral. There's no guarantee. So while you can't know exactly when your time is, I'm going to be very blunt here. If you're 70 or 80 years old, it ain't long. Okay? Be very plain. It amazes me how many folks are 70 and 80 years old act like they're never going to die. You're dying soon. Now, some of you who are young are dying soon. Because, again, it's not just old that takes us out of this world. But know your age. Prepare for that day. As sure, as confident as you are about all kinds of things you plan to do this week, I am confident you're dying. And I'm confident I am going to die someday. And I hope someday people walk by and they look over and they say, don't he look good? It's happening. Guaranteed. Be aware of your age. And if you are getting on up in years, I'm going to use this phrase very boldly. Act your age. Know what season you're in and do things that are essential for you to die well. Enjoy some things along the journey too. Don't get somber on me. Don't get morbid on me. But be wise and know it's coming. A farmer who's moving out of summertime and has just harvested knows what season they're in. And they can chill and relax for a little while, and they can turn the soil over, and they let it rot through the wintertime. But when the days start getting longer in the springtime, and the sun begins to heat up the earth, and things begin to bud forth and bloom, you better get the garden and the fields tilled and the seed in the ground, because you have the next few months to get a harvest, and you can't wait 3 or 4 months to decide, because you've got to be wise in that season. All I'm saying is know which season you're in, be wise, and you say, what difference does it make? Your faith demands that you live with an eternal perspective. You say, I don't want to think about my age. I can't do it. A part of maturity in faith demands that you understand your age, that you understand you're going to die, that you understand you're not living from birth until death. You dreamed one day of marrying a particular boy or girl. You dreamed one day of having a kid. You dreamed one day of buying a house. You dreamed one day of getting a car. You dreamed one day of getting out of debt. You dreamed one day of getting a promotion or having a great career or a great job, or all those different things, or traveling the world. Someday, your faith says you better begin to dream like you're going to some better place that's not here. And you need to understand your age while you're here in order to get ready to go there. And so therefore, Jacob, whose name is now Israel, because he had a great movement of God in his life and he wrestled with God all night, and God gave him a new name because he wrestled with God all night and he prevailed. And he said, I'm not turning loose, God, until you bless me. And it was a defining moment in Jacob's life, and God called him Israel from that day forward. And the entire nation of Israel flowed out of his life and that movement of God in his soul those many years earlier. And his faith demands that he lay the right foundation for an entire nation that exists today in our day. The actions that took place in his life on his deathbed had huge implications into the future nation of Israel that did not even exist at that particular time. But it existed in his own soul. Know your age. Be aware of your age. He said the time drew near for him to die. And he sends for his son Joseph and begins having a conversation about what's to be next. Some of you need to have some of those conversations. Number 2, how can you leave a different and a better legacy? Number 2, make a will and choose a trusted executor. You say, is that in the Bible? That's exactly what Joseph did right here on his deathbed. Called for his son, and beginning in verse, you still awake? Say, I am. And beginning in verse 29, he says to his son, when the time drew near for him to die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, if I found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise me. It was a type of swearing. It'd be a concept of shake my hand on it. We're going to shake on it. Same kind of concept. Put your hand under my thigh and promise me that you will deal with me in faithful love. Do not bury me here in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, carry me away from Egypt and bury me in their burial place. Joseph answered, I will do what you have asked. And Jacob said, swear to me. Swear to me. So Joseph swore to him. Then Israel bowed in thanks at the head of his bed. What's he doing? He's getting his affairs in order. Now, he isn't dead yet. As a matter of fact, after this conversation, Joseph goes back to his regular routine of being prime minister of Egypt. And his father, Jacob, continues to lie there in this bed for months. For months. He isn't dead yet. But he took care of business. The thing that was most important to him was that they not leave his bones in Egypt. Egypt was known as a pagan kind of place. God had made a promise in Jacob's journey that he was going to give him the land of Canaan, which was also a pagan place. But he believed it was going to be a place that represented God, that God was going to be the center of everything in life that took place there in Canaan land. Canaan's fair and happy land. And he said, I want my bones buried in Canaan land. That's where God gave me the promise. That's where I wrestled with God all night. That's where God blessed me. God said he's giving me and my descendants that land. I want to be one who's buried in that land. I want you to get out of Egypt someday and go back to that land. I want my grandboys to get out of Egypt, out of this pagan place, and go back to Egypt. I want God to be the center focal point of their life, not these pagan gods who are here in Egypt. You see, there's more implications here than just his bones. There's a message he's trying to get across to his son, who now has been outside of his personal influence for a long, long time. His son has, in earthly terms, succeeded greater than anyone could ever imagine. This son, Joseph, who had dreamed about someday he would be a big, bright, shining star, and there'd be all these other little bitty stars bowing down to him. And what did that mean? When he interpreted the dream, well, that means that someday all my brothers are going to bow down to me. They didn't like that message. But now he's prime minister of all Egypt, and all of his brothers are bowing down to him. What can we have to eat today? What can we have to drink today? Where shall we sleep tonight? What shall we do today? How can we serve you? He's prime minister. He's the boss. All of his brothers are bowing down to him, and they see God working in his life, and they respect him in that sense. And on his deathbed, he simply wants to make sure he sends the right message and he gets things in order. And I want to ask you, have you put those kind of things in order? Doesn't matter what age you are. I learned, I had someone speaking in my life many years ago. I'll never forget, I was probably 21 years old, and I had begun serving on a church staff. And the man that spoke into me just turned 70 years old last week. Had the privilege of wishing him a happy birthday. We communicate regularly still to this day. He's been a mentor through all these years. And he looked at me. I had no kids. I was married. And he said, how much life insurance do you have? And I said, life insurance. I used my typical gift of West Georgia sarcasm. And I said, I don't need life insurance. You got to die to get it. What good's that going to do me when I'm dead? He didn't smile. He said, do you not love your wife? What do you mean I love my wife? I've been in love with her since junior high school. He said, you're not making but $200 a week. You got any money saved up? No, I hadn't had time to save up any yet. He said, well, if something happens to you, you're going to leave her in a position where she's got to fend for herself and marry some old dud to try to provide for herself, or you're going to provide for her in a way she can just relax and find someone she just deeply loves. You're putting her in a very bad position if something happens to you. Do you understand that? I didn't like that conversation. But within about 3 weeks, I had some life insurance. And I've had life insurance ever since. Ever since. And I've increased it through the years. It all seems like a waste. You're not dead. You may never use that. No, but if I need it, I'll have it. And if something happens to me, my wife can choose to marry who she wants to, instead of being in a position where she's just struggling to survive and tempted to possibly marry somebody that she wouldn't deeply, deeply love. It's small things like that sometimes we don't see a spiritual significance. So what's the spiritual significance of that? It's a part of loving your spouse. It's part of caring for one another. Caring for my kids. Making sure that they're taken care of. We live in a certain manner. We should make decisions in a certain manner that demonstrates our love more than just our presence. The decisions of our life should also overflow in love. And there may be decisions. Some of you, I don't have any connection with any life insurance salespeople out there, all right? So if you're in that business, go to it. But some of you need to make calls this week, just a small thing. You say, how can that be a spiritual thing? It's a massively spiritual thing. Joseph recognized that. Jacob recognized that. And how they responded to their own kids and their own journey. Make a will, choose a trusted executor. He's saying to Joseph, Joseph was not the firstborn in that family, but Joseph was the trusted one to make sure things are done right. Amen. That's another word for all of us, by the way. I have a will, I have an executor. It's not in my family. I have 2 men who are responsible for my estate. They're both part of our church. One of them is Tim Brewer, and the other is Mike Edson, leaders in our church that I've known for a lot of these years. Changed that many years ago. They've proven faithful. They've proven loyal. They have nothing to gain by my death, so they aren't planning on knocking me off. But they'll make sure things are done all right. Do you have all that taken care of? Small thing, but it's a big thing. Number 3, if you want to finish well, you want to have a better legacy and a different legacy than perhaps what you may have lived at this point. Talk openly, it's number 3, talk openly about your relationship and experiences with God. Talk openly about your relationship and experiences with God. That is, to those who are coming behind you. Talk openly. Had these conversations with my parents many years ago and actually challenged them to write down their stories in which they did. I have in their own handwritings their stories about how they gave their life to Jesus. Their own stories about key movements of God in their life at key times in life. You see, it's these stories that are part of the grounding of my entire faith, because I saw the end result. I not only asked them to write down the stories of God working in their lives, but I want to hear the stories about God working in their parents' lives, stories that they heard from their parents that maybe I'd never heard. I've shared with you many of those stories. How did I know those stories? Because somebody took time to tell those stories. My kids have heard my stories over and over again. They could repeat my stories. I want my grandkids to know my stories about how God worked in my life. I want them to know that I gave my life to Jesus at the age of 8, the Bremen High School gymnasium, at an evangelistic crusade. I want them to understand that. I want them to know where it was. I want them to know about some of the failures of my life. I want them to know where and how God called me into ministry. It was a major defining moment of my life. I want them to know that I couldn't hardly carry on a conversation with one individual, much less speak to a big audience when I was in high school. I want them to know that it was a movement of God in my life that transformed me and opened up my mouth, and I hadn't hardly shut up since. I want them to know that it was a movement of God in my life that put their mother and I together. It was the movement of God in my life that kept me moving through some of the hardest days of my life. But it was getting on my knees and asking God for strength and wisdom to make wise decisions, to avoid pitfalls. I want them to know they'll never be smart enough to succeed in life. I want them to know that. They can never get a degree to guarantee success in life. They'll never be able to walk with God without truly understanding what it is to get on their knees, humble their own heart, and say, God, here I am. Fill me, guide me, take me where you want me to go. Take me to do what you want me to do. Use me for your kingdom. Take me far beyond what I could ever do on my own. I want them to know their greatest hope in life for success is a personal walk with God through Jesus Christ. They're not going to know that if they don't hear that from me. Have your offspring heard that from you? I'm not talking about preaching to them in a sermon. Boy, you better get your life right. Girl, you better get your life. That's preaching too. There are probably times that's needed. But there must be a transparent sense of humility and submissiveness that opens up and just speaks honestly about some of the movements of God in our life. And that's what Jacob is doing here to his son. He begins talking about the story. The Bible verses, we won't read all the details, but the Bible verses begin in chapter 48 and verse 3. And he talks about when he was with God and how God Almighty appeared to him at Luz and in the land of Canaan, and he blessed him, and he said to him, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make many nations come from you, and I will give you this land as an eternal possession to your descendants to come. And he wants to remind them, God said that, and God is faithful, and God is true. And if God said that to me when I was a young man, and now I'm 147 years old, I hadn't seen it all happen just yet, but it's coming. And though I be dead, it's coming. And you get back there. You get back to that land. I don't know how he's going to do it, but God's going to put you on that land, and God's going to raise up a great nation. And he did. Why? Because God's faithful. And his legacy moved on by speaking into his son and grandsons what God had said to him those many years earlier. Have you settled for sure if you died you go to heaven? And do you understand why you're going to get there? You're not getting there. You can't say, well, I'm a Baptist. Well, I'm a Catholic. Well, I'm a Presbyterian. You can't find anywhere in the Bible where you get to heaven because of that. That's become a cop-out. That's become an easy road to get people off our back to ask us any serious questions about faith and to help us never have to address the issues. When you get 147 years old like he was, it's time to make sure, and it's time to decide, and it's time to let your offspring know. Not only for you to know, it's time for them to know, when I leave here, don't worry about me. I know exactly where I'm going, and I'm going to heaven. And you can relax, you can rest, you can celebrate and rejoice, move on with your life because I'm in a better place. Amen. You say, well, they'll know that. No, they won't know that if you don't tell them that. They have to hear it from your voice. Amen. Deal with the issue. He's on his deathbed and he's dealing with all these issues. There is a fourth and final thought or principle that we find here in this text. If you want to leave a better legacy and different legacy than what you've built, perhaps in the younger part of your life. Number 4 is, if you can make something right, do so. If you can make something right, do so. There are some wrongs of our life we can't fix. But there's a lot of wrongs of our life we can. There's some wrongs in our life we can't fix, but there's a lot of wrongs in our life we can. It's okay to fix what you can. That's one less thing that needs to be fixed. It takes courage. And it takes drive from the inside to deal with our wrongs. What was the wrong here? Jacob himself, I think, probably feels now that he is at fault. Why did he miss out on his son for all those years? Why was his son? How could a father raise several sons that would capture another son and sell him into slavery, never to be seen again? How could that happen? I think later in his life, he began to reflect, and he did understand that he probably had showed favoritism. He did partly cause some of this problem. And he can't make it all go away. He can't go back in time, as we sometimes say we wish we could. But he says, Joseph, bring me your two boys. And he brought his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Both now Egyptian boys, keep in mind. They are the elite kids of Egypt. Though of Jewish heritage, they have Egyptian mothers, a Jewish father. They're raised in Egypt. Their dad's number 2 in all of Egypt. They go to private school. They got every perk you can imagine. And Jacob looks to them and says, bring them over here. And he puts his hand on their heads and he blesses them. And he officially, on his deathbed, adopts them, not as his grandsons, but as his sons. He literally adopted them right there in the spot and said, from this day forward, these two boys will not be my grandsons. They will be my sons. They will be equal to every other son that I have. They will have the same inheritance and the same piece of goods as all the other sons. If you go back in history and you look at the 12 tribes of Israel, there is no tribe named Joseph. 12 tribes of Israel, which is 12 tribes of Jacob, 12 sons ultimately. There's no tribe of Joseph. But there is a tribe of Ephraim and a tribe of Manasseh, because grandsons were made as sons. And he even read into the future. If you read the story, we don't understand a lot of it today because our cultures are different, but the right hand was to bless the oldest son and have the biggest portion. And instead of putting his right hand on Manasseh, who was the oldest, he put his right hand on Ephraim, who was the youngest. And he gave him the biggest portion. And Joseph said, oh, Dad, you're old and you're blind. You don't know what you're doing. Literally, it's in the text. You're old and blind. You don't know what you're doing. Move your hands and swap them around. It's the wrong one. Nope. It is what it is. Yes, this one's going to be great. He'll have a great tribe. But this one, this younger, he's going to have a great nation. There would come a time when the entire northern kingdom of Israel, when the kingdom split of Israel, and the southern kingdom, northern kingdom, the entire northern kingdom was oftentimes referred to as Ephraim, a place of many nations. You see, we get to speak into the future to some degree. We have to be very careful how we speak into the future. Sometimes we can say the wrong thing to our kids. And yes, that too goes into the future after we're gone. They don't get beyond those words. Y'all all right? Some of you who are at home, you got kids. You have an opportunity to speak into their life. Take the time to speak into their life and make sure you say the right things. Every time you get together, don't speak about all the stuff you're disappointed in, all the stuff you're frustrated. There are times for that. There are times to try to steer in the right direction. But there has to be that some point in our life where we are blessing them. I love you and I bless you. And I'm grateful for you. I believe in you. I tried to get in the habit through the years, even of kids in our church. Sometimes for them just to hear some adults say, I want you to know I believe in you. A few times in signing some of these books to some of our young people who've gotten one, I see who it is, and I would write in there, I believe in you. That speaks volumes. Your voice matters. Know your age. Make a will and choose a trusted executor. Talk openly about your relationships and your experiences you've had with God. Talk openly among your family, your kids, your grandkids. And if you can make something right, do so. Do so. Don't know that I've ever told this story because of the nature of it, but it fits. I'll never forget, several years ago, my father came to our home. We were building a home then. It was about 2004, I guess, 2005. And he said, what are you planning on putting on the outside of this home? And I told him what kind of siding I was going to put on it. He said, this particular home needs brick. I said, well, Daddy, I don't have the money to put brick. I said, I've run out of money. He said, you're going to regret it if you don't put brick on it. How much is the siding you're going to have? And I told him. There's about $7,000 difference between that and brick. He didn't say anything, but a couple of days later, got a call. He said, you home? I said, yes, sir. He said, we're coming down in a few minutes. They drove from Tallapoosa to our home. He gave me a little paper sack. And had $5,000. He didn't have a lot of money. Most years in business didn't make more than $20,000 or $25,000 a year in a small town. And he said, son, here's $5,000. I don't have $7,000. But I thought if you come up with that other $2,000, you can put brick on this house. He said, if you don't, you're going to come here after one of these strong winds out in this field, and you're going to find half your house wrapped around these trees down here. It's exactly what he said. He said, help one of my sons start a business. He said, help the other 2 brothers out, and he told me how they helped them out. And he said, it just dawned on me, I had never done anything like that for you. And he said, I owe it to you. All I'm saying to you is, it may not be anything to do with money, but if you can make something right, and it makes you feel better as a parent or grandparent or friend or just somebody in life, if you can fix something, fix it. Some of you have never given your heart and life to Jesus. He fixed everything for you. Everything. But you're going to trust him. Give your heart and life to him. Call upon him as your Lord and Savior. At the close of our service, if you'd like to speak to somebody, if you're here in the room, would like to speak to somebody about that, we'll be available to you. If you're watching online, if you will chime in the chat thread, or if you will send an email to Leslie at midwaychurch.com, we'll set a time where we can sit down and make sure that you understand what it takes to know Jesus Christ and know if you die today, you'd go to heaven. For those of you in the room who are watching online, some of you need to go fix some stuff this week. Could just be a word to somebody. Just fix something. Make something right. Others of you need to get a will. Write out your wishes. Sit down with a trusted person and say, would you take care of my affairs when I'm dead? Not if I'm dead, but when I'm dead, because you're dying. It's a reality. You need to gather your kids, your grandkids together perhaps, and tell them your story about faith so that when you die, they can be confident and they can go eat some barbecue in peace after your funeral. And not just mourn for days because they dread the thoughts of where you might be. You can assure them of where you're going to be in eternity. Father, thank you for the time we've had together today studying your word. We rejoice and celebrate. Pray that you would help us to live faithful lives. And even if indeed we've had identities that have defined us at some point in life, or failures that have defined us, may our faith allow us to leave a better legacy, and may our faith speak for generations about your faithfulness to a flawed person. In Jesus' name. And all God's people said, let's thank God for his word.